What is up, guys, and welcome back to another video over here on YouTube. Today we're going to jump into some high stakes PLO action on GGPoker. The blinds are 200, 400 with an additional $100 ante in the middle. 4 cards for each player, and I would say we're just going to jump into the action, review some of these hands. This video has been originally uploaded by 80 Big Blind Poker here on YouTube, link in the description. They put an overlay over all the whole cards that went to Showdown. So in this case, you can see the big blind is holding King King 9-7 Rainbow and the button is holding Queen Queen 7-4, giving us a chance to sweat alongside and also hopefully learn a thing or two. So without further ado, let's jump into the action. So as mentioned in the intro, there is an ante in the middle. So at this point, we not only have the small and the big blind, but we also have an additional $600 in the middle, which is basically 1.5 big blinds. And that is going to incentivize all the players to come into the pot lighter. You could also see a button limping range here as a possibility. Queen Queen 7-4 is definitely not out of the ordinary to include in that range. But also some players just play this as a raise or fold strategy. So Laszlo open raising now 3x, and the big blind here in this case has King King 9-7 Rainbow, which at first glance doesn't look like an amazing hand or a hand you want to 3-bet, but in 4-card PLO or PLO in general, as you get shallower, those big pairs increase significantly in value. So if you have a quick glance here at a PLO Trainer solution, we will see that at a 40 big blind equivalent situation, we do have here 40 big blinds for each player and an ante in the middle. If the button open raises and the big blind is exposed to the steal, we will see first of all that the big blind is supposed to defend the majority of the range because there's the ante in the middle that is not included in the raise sizing. And King King 9-7 is a pure 3-bet, even if the combo is Rainbow, and then commits to getting the money in pre-flop. So the proper way to play this basically is to 3-bet the big blind at 40 big blinds. In this case, they're even a little bit shallower than 40 big blinds, making it even better. But in this case, Melihu is just going to call, and we see a flop. Now, this is not a traditional pot size open raise kind of situation where the big blind gets 2-1 and the ranges in play are somewhat equal. Not completely equal, but basically the differences here in this case versus a normal situation, so to speak, is that in a 100 big blind spot with no ante, the button is open raising about 50% of all hands, and then the big blind is defending between 50 and 40% of all hands, making the ranges a little bit more equal. And that would mean that the button is not supposed to just bet every board with any hand, but has to be more balanced and more careful. However, this situation is different in that the button is open raising at a very tight range actually, and because of the stack size, he's open raising about 30% of the hands, maybe 35% of the hands, and the big blind, because he's getting really good odds pre-flop. Remember, if we go back for a moment here and think about this open raise, he has to call only 800 for the 2400 in the middle, making the odds way better than 2-1. And that actually means that the big blind is supposed to defend like most of the range, 75% plus, maybe even 85% plus of the hands. And that will create a large imbalance of the ranges on the flop. So what does that mean? In summary, is that the button gets to just bet a board like 9-9 deuce with potentially all of his hands for a small sizing, given that the button's open raising range is so much tighter than the big blind's defending range. However, again, at 100 big blinds, we have to be more careful and not just like bet any hand. Queen Queen 7-4 here has certain benefits in betting. You can fold out an ace, you can fold out a king, you can still get called by weaker hands like smaller pocket pairs than queens. And Melihu decides to check call the flop, and that's an interesting choice. I think King King 9-7 has certain benefits in check raising the flop. Let's talk about those benefits. And when you decide to figure out what to do with your hand, then oftentimes you should think about what are the pros and cons of each side. So King King 9-7 here, the good part about check raising is that you can dominate another 9, which is great, but you're also unblocking ace-ace, which is probably going to give you action. And at the same time, you don't have a backdoor flush draw, and you don't have a backdoor straight draw. Now, the reason this matters is because you're allowing your opponent to realize more of their equity, potentially outdraw you, because you don't have a backdoor flush draw and you don't have a backdoor straight draw. So it could make sense to check raise this hand and play for stacks. If you're 100 big blinds deep, it is less appealing to check raise because this hand rarely improves to a full house. And when you make a massive pot out of this hand, at 100 big blinds, you might be in trouble by the time you reach the river. But in this situation, because they're so much more shallow, it could make sense to just check raise and try to get the money in, because the stack to pot ratio is anyway smaller than in a 100 big blind situation. So I think Melhu can check raise the flop or check call, but I prefer check raising. Turn is a 10, and it quickly goes check, check. Makes a lot of sense. Laszlo was realizing its benefits, or the benefits of betting queen, queen, 7-4 on the flop already, folding out an ace, folding out a king, at least some of them. And then on the turn, betting would be too thin. I think this is good. And then on the river, Melhu has to make a decision. And when you decide what sizing to bet for value, you should always think, or as a bluff or for value, you should always think about what does your value range want to do. And in this case, I would say that Melhu has basically kind of only a 9 that is value betting at this point. He could potentially value bet a hand like pocket queens, but as we saw in the preflop solution, pocket kings, for example, is almost always 3-betting, if not always. So king would be a good value bet here for a blocker bet. And in this case, he has king with a 9. But the point here is that there aren't many hands in Melhu's range that need to blocker bet. He either has a 9 or worse. And therefore going large and putting hands like pocket queens or pocket aces into a tricky spot, or even a 10, is probably the best way to do it. I don't like this bet. Again, when you use this sizing, you're basically saying that the majority of your value betting range wants to bet small. I don't think that's the case here. Like, what hand wants to bet small? King isn't really in there, or shouldn't be in there that much. I would say that queens or jacks are maybe a little bit too thin to bet. And then 9x wants to go bigger because 9x has more value. However, there are always what ifs in place. What if Melhu has an exploitative reason to go small because he wants to get called by hands like queen, 7-4 at full frequency and goes for the sizing therefore? So in this case, Laszlo makes the call. And maybe, again, we can argue that Melhu was making an exploitative adjustment and trying to get called here by queens or at 10 at a full frequency. Basically, just to summarize the end here, he goes for 1/3 pot, and that means that he assumes that he's going to get called like 3 times more often when he goes 1/3 versus full pot, because full pot he would go 3 times bigger. And he assumes, basically based on the sizing, that he's going to have more success getting called 3 times as often for the small sizing versus going for pot, which again is in question. But obviously these guys play each other day in, day out, so they probably have certain assumptions that will be more accurate than my assumption. Anyway, I would say the sizing choice is maybe a little bit exploitative. We move over to the next hand. Already wasting too much time in the first hand. You guys let me know if you enjoy the deeper breakdowns or just the shallow ones. Some spicy action here. We have King Jack 10-4 in the cutoff as an open raise, and Pedro calls with Queen 9 deuce. Now what happens in these games is that because you have an ante and a small open raise, everyone should be more involved and play more hands. But Queen 9 deuce with 2 players behind on the short stack seems to be a little bit of a stretch. But I don't know. Like, I'm not very versed in those like shallow stack size situations either. So in this case, I would say the effective stack size in this case, like the cutoff obviously has like 80 big blinds, and then this player, Pedro, also has 80 big blinds, but I would say the average stack size is going to be a little bit different because of the players behind. So if we maybe look into something, let's do 75 big blinds to begin with and see what's going on here. So this open raise is a little bit larger, so it will be a little bit tighter to play on the button. Queen 9 deuce is just not a call. Oh, Queen 9 deuce is a call because there's so much dead money in the middle. And in this case, the ante is actually 0.8. So in reality, the ante is a 1.5 big blinds in the middle, which is definitely going to make this range even wider that cold calls on the button. So given the ante in the middle in the small open raise, this player on the button should play a very wide range of hands, probably something along the lines of 30 or 35% of hands that are cold call. And Queen 9 deuce is well within that range. So complete mistake on my end. And it shows also, like, if you play usually, like I play usually 100 big blinds and much, much deeper in live games, then you're not very used to these shallow stack size situations, especially with small open raise sizings and antes involved. So this is a special structure. And I'm sure these pros that play that day in, day out, they have specialized in the structure and they know what they're doing. So great call here by Queen 9 deuce. Laszlo with the King Jack 10-4 in the cutoff. Let's have a quick look on that one because I'm also interested in that range. So the cutoff here, open raising. Again, the ante here is 0.8, and you generally want to work with a larger ante. We're actually running right now like big ante sims as well. So King Jack 10-4, single suited is supposed to open raise at full frequency with a King high suit. assuming a smaller ante, so this is a straightforward open for sure. Flop is 8-6-3. This is a texture where the cutoff can have some bets, and it makes sense like to bet hands like an overpair and a flush draw, for example, especially if you have high interest in building the pot. You're trying to avoid weaker hands you dominate to check back. If you look at Laszlo's hand here, it only has king high and a king high flush draw. He doesn't have a backdoor straight draw. He doesn't have the nut flush draw. It's not a hand that wants to build a pot. And Pedro has a similar spot. If Pedro bets the flop and gets check raised, it's a very bad situation to be in. So I assume it goes check, check. Turn is a 6. So 6 is cool for Laszlo because Laszlo is the only player at the table, or on this hand anyway, that can have aces and a lot of the kings. Pedro will 3-bet some of the kings and definitely all of the aces. So betting here on the turn makes sense. Laszlo has to think about, what am I trying to achieve here betting with king, jack, 10, 4? And I would say he's trying to basically fold out a hand like Pedro's, queens or 10s or jacks, some of the kings. Certainly, he will not succeed all the time on the turn, but he could also barrel the river. Laszlo can also have a 6, pocket aces, 8-6, 3-3, 8-8. Like all those hands are potentially checking the flop to check raise or check call, and Pedro cannot have those hands. So basically, Laszlo wants to bet with a wide range of different hands. He can have aces, he can have kings, he can have flush draws. Although I'm talking more about the value range right now. You can have aces that can bet for value, you can have kings, and anything better as well. So I think going large and really challenging here hands like pocket queens and jacks and some of the kings by just potting turn, I think is a pretty interesting strategy. And then if you get called, you can still fire some rivers and fire into this capped range. So I think that Laszlo should just go ahead and bet large on the turn. Like pot is completely fine as well. I like the sizing. So 2,700 into 3,600. Pedro has a hand that is unfoldable right now, but he has to be aware of the fact that his range is capped and he has to make some heroic calls on the river sometimes. River is a 9, so that should slow people down a little bit at least. Now, Laszlo is an interesting spot because when Pedro doesn't bet the flop, he doesn't have too many nut flush draws, and therefore the king high flush is pretty strong. Sure, the board is paired, but because Pedro wasn't betting on the flop, it is very unlikely he runs into a better hand. We can reduce the combos of nut flushes in Pedro's range by not betting the flop, and we can significantly reduce the combos of boats by not betting the flop. So this is a hand on the river you want to value bet. For how big you want to go depends on how your value range is structured. Like if you say, for example, I'm going to bet all the boats, all the nut flushes, and then some of the king high flushes in this case, then I think going relatively large is good. Like potting or near pot is a good idea. Even though this is going to look thin if he goes large, but the thing is, this is actually the bottom of the value range. Okay, let's see what happens here. I like it. We see a relatively large bet. And then Pedro, very hard to justify a fold. He rivered a flush. How many flushes is he going to have in this case after checking back and calling turn? I mean, some, but at the same time, he has to recognize that he's also capped in this situation, and making a call here is definitely not anything out of the ordinary, essentially. Okay. We move on. Next hand, we have some big hands here. We have Laszlo sitting on ace queen 7-6. He is sitting on 25 big blinds. Very strong hand on that stack size and the cutoff with antes involved. 3.5x open. So obviously we will see a squeeze here by Victor Malinowski with the aces. And at 25 big blinds, I mean, ace queen 7-6. Again, not versing the stack size. I would assume the hand has to fold. But let's have a look if we can find some more information here. 25 big blinds with ante. So to begin with, should the hand open raise? Once again, the ante in this sim is 0.8. The reality is 1.5. So you can assume like wider ranges here a little bit. And we have single suited nut suit. This hand should definitely open raise. And then we see a squeeze. I don't have to look up the aces because it's a no-brainer squeeze. And then ace queen 7-6 is supposed to call, actually. It's supposed to call at 25 big blinds with the ace high suit. So once again, I'm surprised by how wide we have to defend and continue in this scenario. So proper call, even though obviously you're not happy with ace queen 7-6. Flop now is disastrous for both players, really. I mean, Laszlo has a pair and a straight draw, but this is the ugliest pair and straight draw combo ever. And Victor is just sitting on absolute nightmare material here. Ace is 4-3. However, third pot size bet left. I mean, we should see the money going in here. And actually, in this case, Victor is ahead, which is kind of a little wonder. Okay, so flipping on the flop, 2 stellar hands in the flop go in. I think basically both players have no choice in the flop anymore. But getting the money in, great turn card for limitless 10, and then the 4 seals the deal. Not too big surprise, they're going to run it only one time because Victor probably is trying to get rid of the short stacks or just make the whole situation at the table deeper stacked. Okay, next hand, we now know a lot more about the meta in terms of like how wide people open raise and what to expect given the structure of the game. A very standard open raise and call. Jack 7-5. Charisse in the big blind flop bottom set and backdoor not flush draw. Could consider leading, but I would say the default is to just check. By leading, he will create a bunch of scenarios for the turn that will be very ugly. I don't know how this hand continues after leading because Pedro has... Oh, he has clubs. Sorry, I wasn't sure what this suit is intuitively, but obviously not flush draw. So this hand will go lead out and then Pedro will call. Turn is a 4. So now Charisse has to think a little bit about the ranges in play. He was leading the flop with the ace-9-5-5, has no club in his hand. So very likely his opponent has clubs, a hand like pocket kings, king, king, 10-8, king, king, queen, jack with backdoor spades, and potentially clubs. A hand like the nut flush draw, like in this case. So 6-8, a kind of a minor concern here. Certainly a possibility, but I think Charisse just has to keep betting and protect the hand and get value. And then if faced with a turn raise, can still decide to fold. So I would assume we should see a bet. Goes for a half pot. Wouldn't necessarily mind going a little bit larger on the turn. Because I think on the turn, the idea, again, you usually derive your betting strategy or your bet sizing from your value hands. And on the turn, I don't see any 2 pairs just betting. And the turn betting range is going to be a bit more polarized between like strong 2 pairs and sets and straights and big draws. And obviously some bluffs. And I think all those hands just want to bet bigger overall. Not a huge deal. Pedro has a straightforward call. I mean, is it straightforward? I mean, it's hard to fold nut flush draw with some overs against the half pot size bet. River is an 8. So now Charisse has to decide between block betting or checking. I think that in this case, so a 6 makes a straight. Obviously 10-9 gets there. So 6-9, 10-9, and any 6 clubs break out. If Charisse would bet, it would try to get value from a hand like Jack 7, Jack 8, 8-7-9, something like that. It is thin. It might be too thin, to be honest. He's blocking some of the straights holding a 9, though, and he has no club. He has to decide between, is my hand better suited towards check calling or blocking? And the thing about bottom set is that you are unblocking hands like Jack 7 and Jack 8, which is pretty cool because you can get value from those hands sometimes. So I think it is close between blocking and checking. I would assume, though, that this player will check because most people will be uncomfortable value betting a hand like this. And Pedro has a tricky spot, so he breaks out on the nut flush draw. He has 1-10, however, he has to be really careful because he also has 3 clubs. And if there is ever a time to not bluff the busted flush draw, it's usually when you have 3 of the same suit. The only argument for bluffing would be that he has a 10. But the 10 is like not the best blocker. Like a 9 matters, a 6 is obviously the nuts in terms of a blocker. If he had a hand like ace, king, 10, 6, then he would have 2 straight blockers. And the 6 is the absolute best blocker you can have, followed by a 9, followed by a 10. So I think the ace, king, 10, 3 with 3 clubs is just not a good combo to bluff, basically. It's time to give up and just check. Pot size bluff. This is pretty ambitious. And we do see a courageous call, great call by Charisse, and Pedro gets caught with the ace high. Great hand. So in this next hand, we are looking at another confrontation between Pedro this time in the cutoff, ace jack 7-5 on 25 big blinds. So this is supposed to be an open as well. Ace high on 25 big blinds with a lot of dead money in the middle. And last was a straightforward call with ace jack 8-8. Goes for the 3-bet. So this is an interesting play. Probably assuming that he's not only ahead, but probably has a good amount of fold equity in this case. If we go back to the 25 big blind sim, we do see an open over here. I would assume that a lot of the 3-betting range, like ace jack 8-8, should be double suited when going for it. Yeah, so the single suited variation is just going to call in this case. And maybe a hand like, if we look into ace x hands that actually do have a pair and that are double suited, we're going to remove some aces, we're going to remove some kings, going to remove some queens. We'll look into some of the hands here on the right-hand side. And what usually is helpful is to look into the lower EV spot or lower EV combos at the bottom. So a hand like ace 9-9-7, ace 10-10 deuce. Do we find also a single suited variation here that would make the cut? So hands like ace queen 9-9 could be in there, ace 10-10-7, usually higher pairs or more connectivity or both. Even a surprising combo like ace 10-10-8 is going to be in the mix that will 3-bet at this 25 big blind stack size. You know, again, like a lot of like counterintuitive combos given 100 big blind ranges. But I think what is also quite telling here or helpful when it comes to these sims is if you play tournaments, you're oftentimes playing with antes and you're playing shallower stack sizes like these guys are playing here. And working with sims like in PLO Trainer will really elevate your understanding of how to play these spots to begin with. So last up with a loose 3-bet, we can say, and then Pedro makes the call. Is this actually a hand that wants to call after open raising? So ace jack 7-5 out of position. I would assume the answer is yes. We do see a call. And on the flop, not really much else to say then. Let's get the money in. From Pedro's perspective, he has middle pair and a flush draw, and then Laszlo has a gut shot, backdoor straight draw, has some fold equity, so the money goes in one way or the other. Pedro decides to go for check call instead of betting himself and gets the money in here as a slight favorite. 56%. Asking for the run it twice. The answer is no. Even though the game breaks, Laszlo wants to see blood, and this time it goes Pedro's way. So we have a bunch more hands to analyze, not necessarily from the same table, but within the same video. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video and let me know below in the comments what kind of content you would like to see down the road in the future on this channel in regards to PLO. I will continue this series and upload more of those high stakes hands. Until the next time, this has been JNandez, over and out. See you soon.